of the things that that always kind of stuck with me was kind of an episode or a set of events that happened pretty early in my career. I was kind of a young associate producer at NTV in Europe. And one of my bosses asked, well, could you come up with a show can you come up with a TV show where we could kind of do stuff with like the internet? And I kind of thought a little bit about it and kind of walked home. And as I was walking home, I came up with this idea of how you could create what we call the clip and link show, which was basically music videos, and you would have basically user-generated links in between. So we would allow users to send in animations and webcam requests and drawings and chats and all these different things. And now it sounds pretty obvious, but this is kind of like in the late 90s. So this was kind of like a pretty new idea. And, came in the next day and I pitched it to my boss and, very excited. And then he basically didn't believe the idea. He just didn't understand it, I guess. Or, short story short, he didn't like it. So I got a little bit stubborn. So I kind of thought, well, this is actually a pretty good idea. So I went out and bought some of the computer equipment needed, and I did a little tests of it, and it kind of worked. And so one day when he was out of his office, I basically went into his office and put the whole technology setup into his office. So when he came back, he would sit in his chair and suddenly he would be filmed, and then he could see it on all these monitors he had in his in his office. And and then he was like, this is pretty cool. I think I understand it. And then he basically gave me, I think 4 months or 3 months or whatever to develop a whole studio around this concept and stuff like that. So I think, and that very much made my career at MTV. That was kind of like the starting point where I moved from being, a traditional TV producer to being kind of the guy who came up with interactive products. And so it very much kickstarted my career. And I think, like a couple of things that taught me was, first of all, you don't really get fired for getting things done, right? Like if you just try stuff, you can kind of get away. If you try stuff, you can get away with quite a lot of stuff. And, so just do some more things. And the second thing is, I think a lot of people have a tough time conceptualizing kind of ideas if you just kind of speak them out. So often you kind of have to make them more real for people to really understand them. So I guess that was like my two things. You don't really get fired for getting things done, and build prototypes or some kind of visualization to explain your ideas. Because if they're just kind of loose concepts, then the people who can bring them forward might not kind of understand them. I think one of the things that people often get confused is that it's the idea themselves that kind of really change a lot. I think ideas are important, but they're not as important as structure. So I think what's really important is to think about this structure. How can you create? I think there's a gentleman called Thomas Vidal and his colleagues down at Yale University. They talk about innovation architecture. And I think that is really important. One of the things that we're doing now at Prehype, which I think is probably the most disruptive change that I've been working on, is to go in and say to big corporations, it's not because that you don't have entrepreneurial staff. It's not because that that you don't have the business opportunities internally to come up with your next $100 million business. It's because your structure kind of prevents it, right? And that's what the startup guys have, and that's what a lot of corporates are very jealous of, right? So the corporates are always very jealous of a startup's ability to move quickly, to do quick decision making, to launch projects very cheaply and get them in front of users so they can test which ideas are good and bad. On the flip side, ironically, the corporates have a lot of stuff that the startups don't have. Like they have a lot of business insight. They know real problems that can be fixed with technology. They often have a lot of distribution. Obviously, they have access to capital. So what we do at Prehype now is that we say, let us take a few of your staff. Let's take them outside the organization. Let's do a startup with them there where they are not kind of hold down by internal politics and structures, and then let's try to make a startup together, and if it's successful, we'll sell it back to the company where they came from. And I think this notion of giving companies the ability to dance like a startup is something that's going to disrupt a lot. I think it's going to disrupt how companies, invent new products, and even more importantly, how they bring them to market very quickly in order to test if they're good or bad ideas out in the real world instead of in a boardroom. I think the real challenge when it comes to disrupting is to think of ways where you can get people to do what you want without necessarily ask them to do so. And it goes back to this notion of innovation architecture. If you want to get people, for example, to talk more together, you could either say to them, you guys should talk more, or you can put them in the same room. Like, obviously, by just having people sitting next to each other, you will naturally encourage people to have more of a conversation, right? And I think the same way, if you want people to take more risk, be more risk taker, you need to give them a bonus for fucking things up once in a while, right? Like if you say you want them to behave in one way, but all your incentives are structured for getting them to do something else, then you will never achieve your goals, right? And I think for me, sometimes what confuses me is not really that corporates have a tough time being, for example, risk-taking. It is that they are so surprised that they are having a tough time doing risk-taking, right? Because there's nothing in most corporate people's life that encourage them to do so. If they do 20% better than they did last year, then they'll get the bonus and everybody will be very happy. If they take a decent risk, then they might get told that they shouldn't be doing that again. Why were they not just doing what they did last year? So I think as a manager, one of your important tasks and what really will make you an amazing manager instead of a really good manager is to think, what is the changes? What is the organizational structures? What is the alignment incentive? So how can you align your incentives to make sure people do what you want them to do? And I think a lot of people would be amazed by how much impact it would have if they think about those structures around their staff instead of just shouting at them saying, be more innovative, be more creative, or take more risks. The first thing that I learned pretty early on, by the way, by my old boss at MTV, who also allowed me to make that show I mentioned earlier, was that I should make myself dispensable. Now, and I think that is something that seems somewhat counterintuitive by a lot of people, because why would you kind of work yourself out of a job? And his argument was that the only way that you'll be able to move up in the ranks is to basically have taught somebody below you how to do your work, so you're easily to move. If you have a job and you're the only person who can do it, then why would they ever elevate you to another position, right? So what I've been spending a lot of energy on in my career is to basically find a way of making myself dispensable. I think that was the first element. The second element is, and I guess it's more kind of a personal one. It's about having the structure around your personal life. It's not just about the financial structure. It's also about making sure that you're having a good time with your wife and you have a good relationship with your kids, so you don't come in and you're stressed all the time. And it's about making sure that you get your rest, so you don't come in and are overly sleepy. And I think there's a lot of elements you can do around there that will allow you to give you that surplus of energy to go in and propose things to your boss that will benefit you, but as importantly will benefit your boss. Now, if you could go in and have the energy and the surplus to say, I realize we have this situation, this is what we're trying to achieve, here's a few extra ideas that I worked on that will allow you to do your job better, then you have a tendency of getting elevated much quicker, especially if you make yourself dispensable, and you make your boss look good in the process. So I think what we really will start to focus more on is, how do we take this technology and how do we wrap it about human behavior? How do we make sure that the flows in the services that we create makes it incredibly easy for users to do what they want, and incredibly easy for us to basically create services that will be able to monetize because the users really like them. If I look at how we look at technology innovation, it's kind of roughly divided into three boxes. And one is box one, where companies today are generating their revenue. And here we're looking at adding technology to, add some growth to the existing business and maybe improve add some growth and then maybe make it like more optimal and easier for people inside companies to maintain. The second box is kind of how do we extend the products that we have already today in a digital world. And the three is basically these new ventures. How do we create exponential growth for our company? And I think these different boxes require different kind of skill sets, different types of technology, and different types of risk profile. Now, one thing that I think goes across all the three boxes, which is a new kind of skill that is increasingly needed, is the skill of being a self-starter. I think what is going to happen is that you're going to have a change in society where the need for understanding how people operate is going to be more important of how technology operate, and the people who will do well in organizations are people who understand how can I basically create and maintain my own projects and basically add value to the company without necessarily being directed to do so all the time. Now, I think that touches with a third point, which is interesting, that I think you're going to have a lot of people who's going to start side projects because they are looking at getting a life where they have a lot of flexibility in their work-life balance. I think we will see a growth in what I call mom and pop internet shops, which are basically 3 to 5 man company web startups that won't be the new Google or the new Facebook, but they will be very profitable and they would provide a very good and a very flexible living for a small set of people. And I think if that becomes a reality, and then that becomes a problem for organizations because they would like to have these self-starters inside their organization. They don't want these 3 to 5 people to leave and basically work from at home or for wherever they want. They want them to be part of the growth of the company. So I think you're going to see a lot of change in the dynamic between kind of employers and employees based on basically this need for understanding this need for self-starters and for people who understand user experience.